One. All right, everybody, welcome to Lounging in the Lion's Den. I'm Matt Scott. I recently wrote my debut novel, Surviving the Lion's Den, that was released in October of last year. In a nutshell, it is about the kidnap and rescue of a CIA agent from Iran, and I am pleased to be joined with the man who has dedicated his life to civil service. He is a legend in the counterterrorism division of the Diplomatic Security Service, and he is a New York Times bestselling author of a number of books, my favorite of which is Beirut Rules, and as well as Chasing Shadows, which was a very much a personal story for him. He also wrote a autobiography and a book about Benghazi as well. But Mr. Burton, I appreciate you joining us, and we're going to stick with Beirut Rules and Chasing Shadows a little bit today, just because those are my favorite. I hope it's all right.
That's quite all right, Matt. Thank you so much for having me on. You're very kind to do so.
Pleasure is all mine. So let's start with Beirut Rules for a minute. Obviously, for those who haven't read the book, it's about the capture, torture, and attempts to rescue CIA Station Chief William Buckley from Beirut in 1983. I'm not shy about saying that his capture kind of springboarded my idea of having my character, Tom DeLange, kidnapped, although my character was kidnapped in Saudi Arabia by Revolutionary Guardsmen. Mr. Buckley was kidnapped by Hezbollah. So I want to start with that, and let's putting yourself in the shoes of a CIA agent in 1983 versus working in Beirut today. I'm just kind of curious about, do you think the circumstances are different in terms of the undercover agent operating? Are they better in terms for an agent simply because the intelligence services has gotten better, or is it worse?
Well, it's a good question, Matt, and frankly, one that has not been asked of me. I think when Bill was kidnapped, it certainly was the wild, wild west, and you have to put yourself back in that time period where it was an operational necessity for him to be out on his own, living off compound in order to do his job. And like in most cases in the government, it usually takes tragedy to force change. And Bill's kidnapping certainly resonated across the intelligence community, and specifically the CIA and the State Department's Diplomatic Security Service. And as a result of his abduction, the CIA really took a hard look at as to how they protect their people overseas, and things really started to change. So, the operating environment today is still very dangerous in those kinds of missions, and but the protection of CIA personnel overseas has certainly gotten a lot better than it was in the 1980s.
That's really good to hear. I mean, it's for fiction writers, it's one of those things that's kind of fun to kind of play with a little bit. But I mean, there's always a really big reality centered around it. And I think the men and women of the CIA, I'm very, even though I honestly I didn't have the guts to do it. It's one of those things I realized way too late in life that I should have done, but. They dedicate their life to service as you have, and they deserve all the protection that we can give them. And hopefully, whatever it is that they learn at the farm these days will give them that type of protection. But obviously, nothing is 100%. What are your thoughts on Iran's connection to Hezbollah and Hamas today? Do you think it's diminished in any way simply because of all the sanctions that have been placed against Iran, or have the sanctions really kicked the hornet's nest, so to speak, and made it even worse and more dangerous than ever before?
Well, I've been a student of Iran since 1979 with the U.S. Embassy takeover, and certainly I learned a lot as to how to debrief hostages from studying that. And we actually had one of our agents that was held captive the entire time period, and he turned out to be a wonderful resource for me and for us to learn how to go about surviving not only that kind of ordeal, but just the mental chess match that goes underway when you are a hostage. And when you look at Iran and the development of their intelligence services since 79, it's really been transformative, meaning they are a first rate nation state intelligence service today with a global capacity. They have the ability to reach out and touch anybody they want all around the globe, and certainly they have better operational areas than some, like all intelligence services. But they're a formidable enemy of the West and the United States specifically, and they've gotten a lot of money to update their training and their resources and their cyber capabilities. So they're right up there as one of the top tier services around the globe today. And quite frankly, I don't think the sanctions has hurt the intelligence services of Iran very much, because in many ways you need the intelligence services of a nation state when that kind of pressure is being placed upon them in order to not only try to hide your personnel but your money, and to look at workarounds and so forth. So, the Iranian intelligence service today is one that people, for the most part, don't hear a lot about, but rest assured that they're still very much in the game.
What, in your opinion, I had mentioned the sanctions just because that's the thing that I'm the most familiar with. But given your experience, what, without obviously giving anything away that would be confidential, but I'll give you a blank slate and just say, if you had it your way, what would be the one thing or one or two things that could slow them down?
Well, let's not lose sight of the fact that one of the world's premier intelligence services, that would be the Israeli Mossad, is laser fixated on the Iranian nuclear development program. And,
Right.
The Mossad is not a very big service, unlike what the U.S. intelligence community is. But when they put their mind towards target sets, they're pretty damn good at getting the job done. So, first and foremost, I have a high degree of confidence in their capabilities to be able to stay on top of the Iranian nuclear threat and Iran's operations around the globe. And there's a tremendous liaison that takes place between the Israelis and the U.S. across the spectrum. So I think that, from that standpoint, you've got a first-rate nation that's monitoring Iran literally on a real-time basis, which is always good to have in this kind of space, because if you step back and look at us at a 30,000-foot level, Matt, the U.S. has got a lot of requirements, right?
Right.
If you think about what's taking place today with Ukraine and Russia, the South China Sea, and something as disruptive as what's taking place up north with our Canadian friends with the truckers.
Right.
So the U.S. has got a lot of balls in the air they're trying to monitor. So if you're sitting back in Washington, it's nice to know that you do have a service like the Israelis that are keeping a very close watch on Iran.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I remember, a few years ago they tried that virus that really slowed down the nuclear plant there, and that was something that was incredibly impressive. Coming from when I'm not writing, I am in the logistics business. I work for the biggest shipping line in the company in the world, excuse me, Maersk Line, and it's always been certainly on my mind that the way the Iranians monitor sometimes very harshly, I guess I would say, the Strait of Hormuz, and their ability to really shut down shipping if they really needed to. I mean, I think they would face quite an international backlash if they did. But their ability to close that strait and get goods in and out of other parts of the Middle East would really cause a global supply chain nightmare. Is that something that you could see them doing, or how do you, based on your experience, envision them doing something like that if it is possible?
Well, I think it's a good question. It's certainly a card that the Iranians could flip, but rest assured that I have full faith and confidence in the United States Navy. Look, at the end of the day, we control the skies and we control the seas. And there's nothing that we don't have the capability to try to thwart from a threat perspective when it comes to the seas or the skies.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, there are isolated kinds of incidents and flare ups that take place, but there's a vested interest, and you certainly probably know this much better than I from a supply chain perspective, at keeping those straits open. And the world's eyes would very quickly look and turn upon that.
Yeah.
And between the U.S. and the Brits and the French and others, I'm confident that we would be able to counter any move that Iran might have in play there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it always seems like when something's good, you hear about all these little skirmishes, around there. It's kind of like they're rattling the saber. They're saying, okay, look at what we can do. You need to be careful. And our response is obviously, well, you need to be careful what you're doing. But whenever something like that happens, I mean, it just kind of goes crazy. I remember when the Maersk Line vessel got captured by Somali pirates. I mean, we were all it was a Maersk Line vessel, right? So we were all in the war room here in Charlotte, kind of watching and waiting what's going on. So I can't imagine that something like that would really be any different, at least from the perspective of watching it. And on a more international scale, you're looking at something much bigger that we wouldn't want, hope not to see. But it always kind of amazes me the way they can just kind of blink their eyes and say, okay, we're going to cause a little bit of trouble here, and let's just test the waters and see what happens. Let's go back to Beirut Rules for a minute. When you were on the hostage location task force, you arrived, you got you kind of, I don't mean this disrespectfully, but you were behind the eight ball simply because time was was against you, and by the time he was gone, I don't know, I can't remember how many hours you found out afterwards, but I mean, you were trying to catch up. Without giving away any secrets, and I know you discussed this a little bit in the book, but for everybody, just kind of, if you would elaborate a little bit, can you tell about the investigative methods that you used, in that part of the world where you really rely on, rumors and hearsay and snitches in order to try and, track down and pick through that information to, find out what's correct. And how did you deal with the CIA oversight on that? I've talked to a couple of ex-agents, and whenever they're overseas, they call it the memos from the CIA the 10,000-mile screwdriver, just simply because of the second guessing they've had to deal with from time to time. So I don't know if that played a role for you back then. That may be something more of what they have to deal with now, but I'm really curious about the investigative methods that you use in dealing in those parts of the world.
Well, first thing, when you start thinking of this in concept, and I think it's important for the viewers to understand, it's easy to kind of think about how you would treat this kind of investigation today. And the world was much different in 1984 when Bill Buckley was abducted in Beirut, meaning this is before the internet, before cell phones, before GPS in many ways that was available to the public. Obviously, we had it in the military space, but it served us no purpose there in Beirut. So this was an operating environment that in many ways was a terrorist hot zone. If you think in concept of what we lived through of recent with Benghazi, of how you had every terrorist organization in the world pretty much operating there, lots of intelligence services in play, but at the end of the day, what we struggled with, Matt, was we had a complete lack of ground truth and I'll put that in air quotes, ground truth of human intelligence as to what happened. And, I've thought a lot about this, obviously, over the years since that happened, but we simply lack the human sources, the snitches, to be able to tell us on any given day where Bill was, as long, with all the other hostages. I mean, for months on end, we had absolutely no idea that the hostages were actually being held together. We thought that they were being held by individuals. So we were operating in an environment where we just lacked tactical details as to basics, such as who had the hostages, how many hostage guards there were, where they possibly could be held, the group that was behind them. And we really even struggled trying to figure out who had them. We used to argue, Matt, at times. When I say argue, we would debate
Sure.
as to the degree of Iranian control over any of these groups. We had claims of communiques from a group called the Islamic Jihad Organization, and we would pontificate around as to who they actually were. And to put it in perspective for your listeners, one of the things that came out of that was certain investigative concepts. So, for example, when we got a communique claiming that this group held the hostage,
Mm-hmm.
we would run what was called psycholinguistic analysis on the communique to try to make sense of the mindset of the author. Was this a Westerner that had written the communique? Was this a Lebanese national? Could this be an Iranian? And what was the real motive behind that? And then one of the other pretty cool investigative techniques that came out of this as well is hostage videos. For example, right now as I look at you, and you have an awesome bookcase behind you, by the way.
Thank you.
We would study those videotapes and break them down, and I could clearly look to see what books you've read, the color of your shirt, the lighting in your room, and then what we would do forensically would compare those hostage videos over time
Mm-hmm.
to try to determine if it's being shot in the same room. Is it the same backdrop? How did the hostage look? So we would literally take Bill Buckley's picture, his badge ID
Mm-hmm.
at the time, and then we compare it to the shot we see now, and we would ask our medical division to draw some assessment of that. Has he lost weight? Does he look like he's suffering from any illness? What can you tell us? So there was a lot of interesting things that came out of that process, but we were really developing them on the fly. And we were kind of making things up in those days, doing the best we could to figure out who had Bill.
That's really interesting. Well, I have to admit, after I read your book, I read The Devil We Know by someone I think you know, Bob Baer, and he won't go trying to promote your books, not his, but he did ask a very interesting question at the end, and I think it's a fair one. And without saying that, they want the destruction of the U.S. and Israel, his question was, what does Iran want? And I just kind of want to give you, an open forum, clean slate to just, give your experience of, having worked, on Iran and the Iranian regime, and give people an idea of, what do they want long term. And I don't, know that we can ever make them happy, but I'm just curious, with someone with your experience, what's your take on Iran today and what they really do want, minus the destruction of us in Israel?
Well, first, Bob Baer is a good friend of mine, and he's a wonderful author, and he's got a great portfolio of books and experience on this problem. And he certainly was one of the officers that helped hunt for Bill Buckley when he's held captive in Lebanon. So the man, in my eyes, is a true hero. At the end of the day, when you start looking at Iran, I've heard it said before by folks that are a lot smarter than me, Matt, that, the Iranians play chess and we play checkers. And I would not necessarily rule that out. Don't get me wrong. We always have some very smart people that live and breathe and are on, Iran watch 24 by 7. But at the end of the day, what they really strive for is to have a nuclear power, to be able to have that for their own national defense. And they feel that that will help them protect the Islamic State of Iran. And I think from that standpoint, much like North Korea, that's what they're striving for. And in some ways, that makes them almost untouchable from a foreign policy perspective. Now, if you look at it historically, they have utilized, an asymmetric type warfare against the United States and Israel and the West, and been quite successful of it. And look, they can't defeat us on the battlefield. We have overwhelming strength and capability to take them on in a traditional hot war. But what they're very capable of doing and have shown historically is the asymmetric use of groups such as Hezbollah, the Islamic Jihad, and others to carry out their foreign policy goals, whether that be to drive the U.S. Marines out of Lebanon, to drive the U.S. Diplomatic Corps out of Lebanon. And in some ways, they have been successful with that strategy. So where does Iran look 25 years from now? I don't know. It's going to be, I doubt I'll be around to see it at my age, but from that standpoint, to me, that's one of the forecasting things that's going to be fascinating 25 years from now to see how this great power competition does shape out. Not only Iran, but China and Russia and the United States, and where do they all sit?
Yeah.
There's something that I know that I want to believe in this business, at least just from a counterterrorism perspective, that the Israelis, have got a good handle on the problem, got their finger on the pulse in the region. So it's probably a better question directed towards them as to how they envision the future of Iran. But, the U.S. has got a lot of balls in the air right now. And this has always been one of those persistent ones that we really don't want to drop. But you have to look at it in context of, with our withdrawal from Afghanistan, there's really no appetite for U.S. forces to be sent anywhere in the world anymore here domestically from a political perspective. So
right.
It's going to be hard to say what's going to shake out, over the next 3 to 5 years, much less the next 25.
Yeah, that's really true. And I want to stick with that for just a second because my second novel, The Iranian Deception, comes out in June, and the very first page of my book starts out with the unnamed supreme leader from the previous novel, the Surviving the Lion's Den book, has died, and a CIA station chief gets a call from one of her insiders saying he's dead, and the Council of Experts has named his replacement within 3 hours. From a fiction standpoint, that's one of those things that's kind of fun to play with, but I want to stick with Ayatollah Khomeini right now. He's 82. There's been long rumors about his deteriorating health. I've heard, prostate cancer was one of the things that's going around, and it's rumored that his son will be the next in line. So you kind of went into it a little bit, but I just want to get your thoughts on, Iran under a third supreme leader.
Yeah, it's a great question, and that plot line sounds fascinating and most interesting. So it'd be great to see how you shape that story. I think there's actually a couple things taking place inside of Iran. I think that there is that image that is portrayed to the West of one that is very anti-American, anti-Israel. Having said that, I just know from some of my contacts and colleagues in this space and those with a reach back into Iran, that this is a country that has a lot of young people that want to go to work. They want their Apple computers and their Starbucks and their Rolex watches and their fancy cars. So, how does the government of Iran handle this over the next 3 to 5 years and the next 10 years? To me, is also one of those kinds of issues that's fascinating. One of my favorite TV shows was recently aired called Tehran.
Love it. Love that show.
And I do too. And I think they did a very good job at painting a picture of how the Iranian intelligence services operate and just that great power struggle between the West and Iran. And I think it's a very accurate depiction of some of the stressors inside the country that clearly has a sense of the haves and the have-nots. Mm-hmm. So at some point in time, do the 18 to 25-year-olds inside of Iran decide that it's enough is enough? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's going to be one to see. That's going to be fascinating to watch play out.
Yeah, and it's I kind of got into it. I watched a documentary. It was on Amazon Prime of all things, and it was just talking about how in Iran, everything's forbidden, but anything is possible. And it really took a documentary look at the young people in Iran who, when they're not out in public, they have parties inside their house, and how they have to make beer from non-alcoholic beer, and just how they want to. I won't go so far as to say totally westernized, but more westernized than some of the more traditional. And I kind of based some of my Iranian insiders, on those characters. So I think and I kind of go into that in books 2 and 3. So hopefully I'm right, but you never know. I want to ask you one more question about Iran before we move on. In my novel, The Surviving the Lion's Den, there's a chapter on Operation Chevrolet. In which the Iranians tried to kill the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, or the Saudi Arabia ambassador to the U.S. in 2011. The Saudi-Iran relationship has always been very, very interesting to me. I kind of liken them to two people who come over for Thanksgiving to only because they want to make grandma happy, and I just kind of curious about your take on their relationship, because it seems like it's on again, off again. Obviously you got the whole Sunni versus Shiite thing going on, but I just kind of wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, that was a fascinating case to watch play out, and certainly with it coming out of Mexico City, which is also very interesting and not surprising to me. That's how the Iranians operate. They don't really have a very active footprint here in the United States. They haven't, since the revolution in '79. So they tend to target the United States from either Mexico or Canada. So that operation coming out of Mexico City to target the Saudi ambassador, you have to always think in these kinds of things as you deconstruct these plots are how much are actual aspirational versus operational, meaning the desire to go out and target a resident foreign official here in the United States is easier said than done, especially the Saudis. They have pretty good security when it comes to the protection of their ambassadors and their diplomats here inside the United States. So when you start looking at those relationships, the one thing you learn in this business, Matt, is there are no friendly intelligence services. And, let me repeat that, there are no friendly intelligence services. Mm-hmm. And so, there's a watchful eye on each one of each other, mm-hmm. but that's just the way the game is played all the time, right?
Right.
So, if there's an operational need to help each other for whatever that might be, you'll tend to find intelligence services cooperate. For example, early on when I was an agent, I was not as savvy as I perhaps should have been. And we had a couple Americans killed on a aircraft that had landed in Tehran. And me, being young and dumb as a new agent, uh, I said, well, heck, maybe if I go to Interpol, they can help me. And Iran was actually a member of Interpol in those days. I don't know if they still are or not. I haven't
Mm.
checked on that in a while. But so I sent a request to Interpol in Lyon, France, asked for some details surrounding the death of the Americans, and figured that the cops would help another cop.
Right.
And lo and behold, I got an answer. They were very helpful. And they sent me, reports. They weren't as detailed as you and I would expect, but I also have to look and remember the time frame of the early
Mm-hmm.
80s. And so
Yeah.
um, it was a vivid reminder to me of the difference, Matt, between, and I started as a cop turned agent,
Mm-hmm.
how cops around the world tend to cooperate,
Mm-hmm.
even in some of these rogue nations, whether it be for the apprehension of fugitives or whatever, versus the intelligence services that are always butting heads or always stealing and lying and or trying to watch each other. So that's probably a pretty good practical explanation as to how the game's really played.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a startling difference in reality. And but I always found that fascinating. That even though here the great Satan had requested some reports from Iran, the cops turned around and gave them to us again through Interpol.
Sometimes all it takes is you got to ask. Um,
Yeah,
it worked for me trying to get you in this interview.
well, you're absolutely right. I tell people all the time. I mean, if I'm looking to interview people for book research or whatever, 9 times out of 10, people will say, "Sure, be happy to help." And as you and I both know, at times it can be a scheduling issue, but for the most part, if you ask for help, people will give you the help.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it doesn't always work, but it never hurts to ask, right? I want to switch gears to another fascinating time in your career, and you'll have to forgive me if this is a little bit of a fanboy thing for me. You were involved in the pursuit and arrest of Ramzi Youssef, the bomber of the World Trade Center in 1993, and I'm just kind of interested in hearing, from you, what was it like to be in the room with him and look into his eyes. I've heard that he had a very Charles Manson like presence. I don't know if that's true or not, but this comes from somebody who reads the Mindhunter books and watches the Mindhunter series on TV. But those were really more so domestic criminals. Not that they're all that different, but from your perspective, what was it like when you sat down with them?
Well, first, let me say about the Mindhunter. I had John Douglas on one of my podcasts
Really?
a few years back, and that was just a fascinating individual to talk to because I can't, I don't know off the top of my head any other person that's talked to so many different mass killers than John Douglas, and he was just a great guy, and actually called me up after the interview to just chat about some of our old cases because he preceded me by a generation or so, but
Mhm.
um, still his stories were just simply amazing. Ramsey Youssef, look, Matt, I've gotten way too much credit for anything to do with the capture of Ramsey Youssef. I mean, one of the things that we had was what was called the Rewards for Justice program. It was subsequently determined to be the $20 million for Bin Laden,
Mhm.
but we had that program in my office, and at the time, the maximum reward we could pay was $2 million, and we had blanketed the world with wanted posters, even matchbooks, and I've got mine and I should have pulled one out. I didn't know if you're going to ask. I didn't know if you're going to ask me a question about Yosef, but I still have one around here somewhere. And we flooded the world with Ramsey Yosef matchbooks and pictures and even public service announcements. We had
Mhm.
a fair number of Hollywood actors and actresses that helped us, such as Charles Bronson and Charlton Heston and Kim Basinger
Oh wow.
and Charlie Sheen.
That,
So it was fascinating to get that done. But it all unraveled fairly quickly with a individual that came forward and said that he knew where Ramsey Youssef was and he was in contact with him. And quite frankly, I was not a believer. We had been receiving countless reports of Youssef. Most of them were fabricators, individuals that wanted the money but had no access to Ramsey Youssef. And I was very skeptical at first. But within 72 hours, we had Yosef in custody. If memory serves me right, I might be off a few hours or so. But,
hmm.
um, you know, um, I, I don't attribute it to a great amount of skill, Matt. I attribute it more towards an individual that did not want to die, had befriended Ramsey Youssef, who that really wasn't his true name. His name was Abdul Bassett,
Hmm.
a Kuwaiti by birth. And he wanted to get out of the mix. And we said to him, look, you can make a lot of money if you just tell us where he is. And quite frankly, I never expected to hear from him again. But he called and said that Yosef was going to be at this hotel. He didn't know exactly when he was going to come in, but he thought it would be happening very quickly, like within the next 24 hours or so.
Hmm.
And Yosef called him, and the source got in contact with us, and our agents went over and knocked on the door, and Ramsey Yosef answered the door, and there he was.
Hmm. So what was it like talking? I mean, what was it like talking to him?
Well, bear in mind, I'm in Washington when this was all unfolding. I'm running the show from Washington, and our two agents, there were two of them, were in Islamabad, Pakistan, and the three of us worked that case, just together. And I'll never forget, I was sitting inside the FBI Strategic Intelligence Operations Center, and we had an open line with Islamabad.
Hmm.
And I could hear the radio traffic from the hotel to FBI headquarters. And um, I'm hearing the agent say, well, Fred, we're at the door. And I said, well, knock on it. And they said, okay. And I hear the knock. And then that was kind of the, oh my gosh moment.
Right. Yeah.
And I looked at John O'Neill, God rest his soul, who
Hmm.
perished in the Trade Towers collapse
Yeah.
on 9/11. And I said, John, it's going down. And he said, you're kidding me. And I said, no, they're knocking on the door. And then I heard our agents on the radio say, we've got him, we've got him. And I just kind of looked at O'Neill and I said, hey, John, we got him.
Oh man.
And he said, you're
What a
kidding
great moment.
me. He said, you're kidding me. And I said, no. And he said, are you sure it's him? And I said, well, hold on a minute. And I said, hey, are you sure it's him? And they said, oh yeah, yeah. He's dyed his hair. His hair's kind of red, but it's him.
Oh man.
I said, great. Now, you know, how much of that was timing? A lot, Matt. How much of that was the Rewards for Justice program? A lot. I give credit to that office. I'm very proud of what that office has done. It was in my unit. Tremendous success story for the war on terror.
Hmm.
And, the rest is kind of history.
Yeah.
The real backstory to that, it was almost more complicated to figure out what we were going to do with the source. And that, was really a lot of work to get that source in a safe haven and to get him the money that he deserved,
Hmm.
which was $1.2 million in
Wow.
cash. In cash, we paid him. Don't know what that would be worth today, but
It was worth his
uh,
arrest then. That's all that matters.
yeah. So that's how it went down.
Hmm. That's yeah. I can just imagine being in the room and holding your breath at hearing that. Obviously, we'll still call him Ramzi Youssef. Was the nephew of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the architect of 9/11. And there's been a lot of conspiracy talk, I guess, is the best way to put it. But I thought it was at least interesting to maybe ask you, based on all the connections of KSM and UBL and Yusuf, is it of your opinion that maybe there could have been conversations between Yusuf and UBL at the time, or is that just one of those things that's more fun to kind of play around with just because it's coincidence?
Well, I I certainly believe that if we had not taken Ramzi Youssef out, he would have, in all probability, attacked either the U.S. Embassy Islamabad or targeted a diplomat there. I think he was in Islamabad for the purposes of carrying out a terrorist attack. To this day, I don't know what the target was. The source did not know either. So that's one thing. His relationship with his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was something that we had mapped out at the time. And in retrospect, if we had been a little bit smarter when we grabbed Yosef, could we have worked some sort of operation to try to lure Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in using Ramzi Yosef?
Hmm.
It's nice to speculate, but I don't know if we would have been successful at doing that.
Yeah.
Um, the interaction between the three, I think that if we had not taken Yosef down, he certainly would have been involved in the 9/11 plot if we did not subsequently capture him or kill him somewhere else.
Hmm.
So um, he was probably the best bomb maker they had at the time, and was certainly very good at it.
Yeah.
Now, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, we had opportunities to get him, but we kind of bungled it, to be blunt. And that, to me, is something that's kind of always stuck in my craw. That if we had been a little better organized and had more operational capability to pick up Khalid Sheikh Mohammed after we grabbed Ramzi Youssef, we perhaps could have prevented 9/11. Now, is that wishful thinking on my part? Would have operation gone forward anyway in some format? Probably. But, at the end of the day, you know, terrorism in those days, Matt, and it's kind of hard for people again to fathom, but the world was different before 9/11, right? It really wasn't a national priority,
Right. Yeah.
and we did not have a lot of resources. We did not get a lot of cooperation from any other foreign government besides the Brits and the usual suspects, the
Hmm.
Canadians, the Australians, the Brits. And so we were always kind of day late and a dollar short. Therefore, capturing a guy like Ramsey Youssef, we just had the stars aligned and we got lucky and everything kind of came together. And, I've said this before and people think I'm joking, but, you know, um, it happened so quickly, even Washington couldn't screw that up, right? And I think I think that was the reason why. If we had tried to think through this for months on end, there's no doubt in my mind it would have gone sideways, and Yosef would have escaped.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes playing the cards close to your vest, is what works, and I'm sure that Dick Clark was one happy guy when you got him. among others. And speaking, not only for myself, but I'm sure for everybody that's going to watch this, don't definitely don't be too hard on yourself. I think, when you talk about 9/11, it's just one of those things where, everybody missed something somewhere along the way. And, thank you for your service and everything that you've done, because you did so much. We've got a few more minutes left, so I hope we can get through the next couple of questions. I want to ask you one more question about Yusuf. I was watching something on the History Channel, I think it was a few years ago. I heard that he converted from Islam to Christianity while he was in prison. What do you make of that? I mean, is he just playing a game with somebody?
I had heard that too, Matt, but I don't know what's fact or fiction. I have thought, over the years of perhaps reaching out to him, and but in reality, I haven't. There's in all of these cases that I ever worked, Matt, there's always loose ends. And one thing that really, really bothers me is I really, really want to know why he was in Islamabad that day when we picked him up.
Mm.
And he might never ever tell me, or might never tell me the truth, but I would like to know what he was really up to that day.
Mm.
And I also would like to know what degree of air cover he might have had through various intelligence services during that time period. Like, was he, and I don't know the answer to this question, in contact with other intelligence agencies of a foreign nature, such as, let's say, the Pakistanis, for the sake of argument.
Right.
So those are the kinds of questions I would love to ask him. But would he tell me? Would he see me? Could I get to him at the Supermax? I don't know. Would I have to jump through 25 hoops? But those are the kinds of loose ends that just kind of gnaw at me, especially the older I get.
I tell you what, that would be, man, I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. I can tell you that. All right, let's switch and talk about Chasing Shadows for just a minute. Just to kind of recap a little bit, you heard about the murder of Joseph Alam the next morning, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
You kind of, is one of those things that you kind of just never was able to let go, and then you were able to reopen the case in 2007. After I read the book, I kind of started thinking about it in reverse, and one of the plot lines that I used was, what if there was an Iranian who was still trying to track down somebody who was involved, one of his fellow Iranians that was still involved in the 1953 coup against Mohammad Mossadegh. But for you personally, and I'm sure you get this question a lot, but I just wanted to ask, what was it so much about, that incident, when you were so young, that just kind of stayed with you? Was it, just a sense of, I don't want to call it PTSD, because that's not the right thing to say, but more so, this happened in my neighborhood, this happened, close to me. What was it that just kind of never made, the circumstances surrounding that go away?
Well, it's a good question. You would probably need a team of shrinks to figure that out, but some cases just kind of stick with you, and I don't know if it was fate or destiny, Matt, but Colonel Alan is killed in 1973 in my neighborhood. 2 years later, I joined the rescue squad that transported him to the hospital that night. Then I become a cop in the area where he was killed, and I used to drive by his house at night when I was a cop in my marked police car, and just kind of sit there and think about how the killers got away. And and then when I forgot about it for many, many months, and then I went off to become a special agent. And then when I got into my office as an agent, there was this old file that I was rifling through, and there was the Colonel Alan file. There wasn't much in it. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh my goodness. And I asked my boss at the time if I could look into it. And he was a wonderful guy, but kind of looked at me with a cigarette dangling out of his mouth and said, "Yeah, but got to make sure you take care of what's blowing up today too."
Right.
And I said, "Sure." So I kind of reopened it and worked on it as I could. But we just had so many cases. We had hijackings and bombings and hostage takings, and I was never home, and we were just constantly on the road. And I would piecemeal my way through that case, and then, but I always thought that this was a man who was a hero in the state of Israel. His family had been eliminated by the Nazis. He fled Czechoslovakia and to the new state of Israel and became a hero of the state of Israel. And then he's sent over to this very senior post for the Israelis. For your listeners, I mean, Washington's a good assignment for any foreign service, and for the Israelis, it's an important post. And he was the military attaché there at the Israeli embassy when he was gunned down coming home late at night from a party by what I subsequently learned to be the Black September organization, the same group that was responsible for the 72 Munich massacre. And so, that's probably a group, Matt, that I've studied as long as Hezbollah, if not longer. And I probably, have looked at that group and dissected that and unpacked it since, the 1980s more than anybody, at least that I'm aware of. So why did the case stick with me? I don't know. I think the whole process of Colonel Lon getting gunned down, murdered in front of his kids that night, knowing that justice was never done, knowing that we did not do a good job investigating the case when it first happened. He was forgotten by his own country, which I always found to be odd. So I'm very proud of the fact that we got a Hebrew version printed of Chasing Shadows. And at one point in time, the book was on the official website of the Israeli Air Force.
Oh, wow.
Which, for authors,
Sure.
that's something that I'm very proud of.
Absolutely.
And so there's not a day that goes by that I still don't think about that case, and the missed loose ends that are still dangling from that. And quite frankly, as early as of this morning, I was looking at some old clues surrounding that case that I still can't figure out, that kind of drive me crazy. For example, I was able to figure out who shot and killed Colonel Alon, but I don't know who the wheelman was in the getaway car. And
Interesting.
I'm not going to give up. Although the hourglass, right, or the hourglass of time has shifted a little bit on me, but I intend to keep pursuing those leads as I can, and I'll get there one day.
Your investigative pursuit, just I'm really in awe of it. I mean, to just be able to finally put something like that to bed, I just think is nothing less than incredible. So congratulations to you, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
I got two more questions for you with regards to Chasing Shadows. It was, I have to laugh about it, but it was real for you, and I kind of hoping at least at some point, you laughed at it as well. You said you went, I want to make sure I get this right, through the back alleys of Paris, the 6-Day War in Israel, and a number of other just crazy locations that, all stem from this one incident just outside your house. I mean, what was, as you discovered just how, the scope of this, just how much bigger it got? I mean, what was kind of going through your head? I mean, was it just kind of mind blown type thing? Or is it just, what have I gotten myself into? Or just kind of curious about, your thoughts on that as you discovered it.
Well, it's a great question, and one that, again, has never been asked of me. I always tried to look at it from a pure analytical and a detective perspective, meaning how did they go about picking Joe, Colonel Alon?
Mm-hmm.
How was that process done? Who might have been utilized to do that? And then I kind of just always ground myself with the facts and the details and follow that wherever the truth may lead you. I mean, it's kind of that basic investigative 101 work that they teach you at any federal law enforcement academy or any police academy.
Mm-hmm.
Follow the evidence, follow the leads, and then worry about all the other political aspects that might come into play.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, Joe was killed at an extraordinarily pivotal time in the history of the world. Right before the Yom Kippur War, where literally the state of Israel almost fell.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was in this critical position here in Washington D.C. as the Israeli military attaché to the United States. And obviously, there's always a lot of dialogue and exchanges that go back and forth, and he was interfacing with the Pentagon. So in many ways, he was a perfect target. And that's something still to this day, Matt, that I always want to have a healthy respect for our adversaries. But you could not have picked a better target by the terrorist group Black September than Colonel Joe Alon because of who that man was and the position that he was in. So I always have stepped back and thought of this in concept of what am I missing? There had to be some other hand in play here. And that's something that I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to. But if I was a terrorist commando picking a target to assassinate at that moment of time inside the continental United States, he would have been a perfect target.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't get that out of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
He was almost too perfect.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I never really thought about it like that. That's very interesting. Okay, so I want to ask you just a question about your as an author, of the craft right now. You said that when you were doing Chasing Shadows, you put a lot of dedication into it at night. I think you said in your bedroom by a low light while your wife was sleeping. My craft is not all that different. My wife tends to fall asleep on the couch about 8:30, so I'll do the 8 to 5 thing, come downstairs, eat dinner, walk the dog, talk to her for a little bit until she falls asleep, and then I come back upstairs and do the author thing for a couple of hours. Has your craft changed a little bit? And if you are at liberty to discuss, what are you working on right now?
Well, your latter question first. I'm not at liberty to discuss what I'm working on right now due to a non-disclosure.
No problem. No problem.
But rest assured, I've got something that fingers crossed should be announced pretty soon.
Nice.
And I'm pretty excited about that. I've kind of changed the older I've gotten, and with the books that I'm working on, I've changed my processes a bit, meaning I find it better for me now to write in the morning. So I'm typically up by 4, take the dog out, and then I write from 5 to 7, sometimes to 8, and or researching during that time period for the purposes of writing. I don't have a word count that I work by. I tend to try to write up what I'm thinking at that moment in time in the pursuit of the book, and then I'll come back to it quickly the next morning. So like this morning I got a couple pages written this morning, 2.5, and tomorrow, Saturday morning, I'll go back and look at that briefly to just see where I left off. And then tonight I'll start thinking about it before I go to bed as to what I'm going to kind of lead in tomorrow. So that's really kind of my process. My part of my challenge, or part of the challenge in the nonfiction space, is I really do try to get it right with footnotes. And, I have to submit my books for pre-publication review
Mhm.
to the U.S. government. In essence, I ship them off to the CIA, and they farm out relative sections to the other government agencies. And so, what I found in the course, and this has been a learning experience, the more footnotes you have to back up your statements through public records or public sources, the easier it is to get through. You might have noticed, and for your readers that may not have read Beirut Rules, um, I've had a few people say, well, why are the blackouts, the redactions in the book? And that was a decision that the publisher made, and I agreed with it at the time. They said, look, we want, for the spirit of transparency, we want the reader to understand exactly what the U.S. government took out. And I said, okay, I agree with that. Let's let it go that way. I could have simply deleted those,
Hmm.
or I could have rewritten those portions that are blacked out in the book. But I like the idea of letting the reader know what the government took out. And, bear in mind the agency, the CIA, they were very helpful early on. When I first wanted to tell the story, Matt, I approached the CIA and said, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to tell a story that on a case that I worked for many, many years, and one that's kind of haunted me. I'm not a bomb thrower. I'm not out to expose any negative things that were done. Hell, I was part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution and tell the story of a hero who died for his country, a story that needs to be told. And they said, we're all in. How can we help you? And then I approached the family. That's been kind of like my MO of late. And Bill had two very elderly, one elderly sister and an elderly significant other. And I introduced myself and I said, hey, I want to tell a story of your loved one and I want your help. And they were initially skeptical and very protective until they got to know me a little bit better. And they were just a treasure trove of information to help me piece together Bill Buckley, the man. And if there's one thing I regret, Matt, is when I was an agent hunting for Bill Buckley, I did not know Bill Buckley, the man. He was just another hostage, I'm sad to say, that we were hunting for. A very important hostage, but I did not know much about the man. And so part of the healing process, I like to say, about putting the story together was reconstructing Bill Buckley, the man, the
Yeah.
hero who died for his country.
Right. And I think you did a fantastic job of that. And I know I would certainly hope, I mean, that his family is proud of the book. I mean, I was certainly proud of the book to finally know that story. And with regards to the blackouts, to me, it's kind of fun. When you're a spy fanboy, I guess, like me, there's a level of authenticity that lends to it. So it's actually kind of fun. And you never know, 10 years from now, you might get lucky and get a version of it where, they finally, declassify some of that, and you could get, a I don't want to say true version, but a version without the blackout. So you never know. It happens. I think I read another book. I think it was about the initial invasion into Afghanistan where something they did that. So you never know. But I want to. I've used up the hour. I want to thank you for coming online with me. You are a true patriot, sir. I salute you. And if I could shake your hand or give you a fist bump, I certainly would. It has been an honor, a true honor, and my pleasure to speak with you. And thank you for agreeing to speak with me.
Matt, you're very kind. Thank you so much for having me on, and good luck with your next book.
Absolutely. All right, so for all the users, or excuse me, all the viewers, you got Surviving the Lion's Den, my debut novel. We got Chasing Shadows by Agent Burton here, as well as Beirut Rules. These are my two favorites, but if you look over Mr. Burton's shoulder here, you'll see his autobiography Ghost and the Benghazi novel, available on Amazon and e-readers everywhere. And as my old buddy Bud Barker used to say, help control the pet population, have your pet spayed or neutered. And thank you again, sir. It was my honor.
Thank you, Matt. Take care.
All right, hang on for just one.